Hi. It's not often that I've had to review a device that's left me so befuddled. Is befuddled a good word? I'll say befuddled. So disappointed that I barely even know what to say about it. First of all, thank you to banggood.com for sending me this. So this is it here. It is the E6 handheld. I am not exactly clear what the brand is, what company makes it. It's not Anbernic or Powkitty or anything. From what I can find, I think it might be from a company called GAMEMT, maybe. It's an interesting little handheld, and at only $50, there's definitely some good to be found here, some merit, and we are gonna get into the goods here, but there's a reason it's $50. Banggood has it for $71.99 right now, but that is including the 128GB SD card, which is the largest storage that you can pick with this thing if you've got it elsewhere. I will have an affiliate link in the description and possibly a coupon code, so look for that. It comes with everything you would expect out of these things: the device, the charging cable, an instruction manual, and I believe it came with a screen protector too. And I've never received one of these with the SD card secured to the outside of the box under the plastic like this, but hey, it is what it is. It's got a 5-inch HD IPS display with a 16:9 aspect ratio. I don't know exactly what resolution it is. It says 4K in one of the photos, but it's not 4K. We all know this is not 4K. It says it's a full fit IPS screen. Don't know what that means. It claims to have Hall effect joysticks, and I couldn't find any clear indication as to what exact chip that this thing has. It says it has the GAMEMT chip, and that's it. There's no specs as to what the chip is. It does say it has 8GB of RAM. Actually, it says it has 8 plus 1GB of RAM. So, yeah. Battery life is confusing because it says it has a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, and then right under that it says it has a 3,600 milliamp hour battery. And on the page it says it is rated for 5 to 8 hours of battery life, and it also says it's rated for 3 hours of battery life. So it has battery life, we know that much. From what I could tell, it's probably somewhere in between. So first I'm going to get some of the positives out of the way, as well as just kind of going over the design, because this thing does have some positives, and a lot of it has to do with the design of the device itself. So first of all, this is it. This is what it looks like. Here it is from behind. We've got some heat vents in the back for some reason, which I don't even know if there's even fans inside of it, to be honest. It doesn't seem like it really gets hot, but maybe it's just because there are fans and they're silently doing their job. There's also some heat vents along the top here. It's pretty clear to me just from looking at this thing. My first impression was that it looks very much like a small Steam Deck. If you'd handed me this thing and told me it was a new Steam Deck Mini, I totally would have believed you. Here you have your volume rocker, your OTG USB-C port, your charging USB-C port, the slot for the micro SD card, and you've got the power button, which you can hold to turn it off, or you can press it to put the device to sleep. Then along the top we have these shoulder buttons and triggers, which actually have a pretty unique looking design. The way they're shaped, a little unique, a little different than what I'm used to seeing, and it looks pretty nice. Now, despite how huge these triggers are, they're not analog at all. If you look here, they just kind of click down a little bit, and that's about it. But that's fine. You don't really need analog triggers for anything that this thing can play, but still, it's a little odd that they're so big but only move down like a millimeter or two. Then you have your thumbsticks along here, which actually aren't too bad. They're very similar to Nintendo Switch Joy-Con thumbsticks, so not terrible, not the best. Then you have this D-pad here, which is not really a D-pad so much as it is this shape. It actually kind of reminds me a lot of the Xbox Elite controller, and then you got your A, B, X, and Y. The buttons all look pretty nice, and they all function, but unfortunately the face buttons are kind of mushy and almost scratchy, where it kind of feels like they're grinding against something, especially the A button. They almost feel cheap when you're pressing down. Now the device itself doesn't feel cheap, it actually feels pretty hefty. I really like the white material here. It feels smooth, it feels nice. Not slippery, not too sticky or glossy. It just feels good. Honestly, if the software were any better, I could easily recommend this thing based on its build quality alone, especially at $50. There's white LED lights along the thumbsticks, as you can see, and these ones along the face buttons. Honestly, I could do without these. I think it would look better without them, but it is what it is. And this is the software. This is the main page where you're going to go through your menus and select your games and whatnot. So first of all, where things got confusing for me immediately was this L1 for collection. Now on this screen, L1 doesn't do anything, but this just always stays here. You actually have to go into the game selection for L1 to do anything. L1 will add a game to your favorites. But going back to the home page here, so we've got your search, which is pretty self-explanatory. You got this, which just looks like a Dragon Ball, and I didn't know what it was because obviously it's not labeled, but it's actually your favorites. Which makes sense because when you favorite a game, it has a star on it, so there's a star there. I get it. But this, what the heck would you think this is? It's actually your most recently played games. What that symbol has anything to do with recently played games is beyond me, but there it is. Real quick, we're going to take a look at the settings here to show you what you can do, and it's really not much at all. You can adjust the brightness, you can change the language, there's a bunch of different language options, you can change the time, there's your system information, and you can factory reset. That's it. This screen you're seeing here is your settings. And then you've got your different systems you can play. PSP is first because honestly, this is probably going to be something you would use for PSP. You've also got N64, PS1, MAME, Neo Geo, CPS1, CPS2, NES, Super Nintendo / Super Famicom, Mega Drive / Sega Genesis, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, and FBA. Not a whole lot, but not bad for $50. I mean, when the Miyoo Mini Plus launched, it was only around $50 and it did not have PSP or N64. Probably because Miyoo knew the limits of the Miyoo Mini Plus. So before we get into the gameplay, experience, and performance, first thing I want to do is kind of go through some of the interesting quirks of the software and how it works. So first we're going to go into search and say I want to look up something like Yoshi's Island, so I get to Yoshi and there's all these different games along the right that you can see here that it just really doesn't help narrow things down. It's like, okay, well, let's keep typing. Let's add in the S. Now it just says Yoshis and nothing comes up because there's nothing that says Yoshis. Okay, so obviously if I want Yoshi's Island, I'll need the apostrophe, but there's no apostrophe. There's literally no other punctuation. There's just a period. How am I supposed to put in Yoshi? I mean, you can clearly see it's in Yoshi's cookie right there. So how do you make your search function require the punctuation but not have the punctuation to search? I don't understand it. Also, just as a side note, how many versions of Yoshi's cookie does this thing need? There's only so many Yoshi's cookies that I could play. And you might be noticing another little thing here, and that's that the navigation going through game lists is slow. You can hear the beep every time I press the button, so it knows I'm pressing the button, but it just won't go as fast as I want it to. And as you can see, there's a lot of games here that I'm just like, what are these? There's no box art for a lot of the games, and so it uses this default picture of Chun-Li for some reason. And it's kind of up to you, you're kind of hit and miss to figure out what the difference is between Yoshi no cookie, Yoshi's cookie, and so on. Obviously there's going to be ones in different languages, but it's just frustrating to use.
How many versions of Knights of Valor 2 does this thing need?
Another issue you might run into is that the box art or picture selected for a game just doesn't really indicate what it is correctly. Like God of War, it's just called God of War, but it's actually God of War Chains of Olympus. Like here's another thing, Dragon Ball Z Shin Budokai 1 has the Shin Budokai 2 title screen as its artwork, but Shin Budokai 2 just has this as its artwork. So you know, where's the consistency here? Now, if you're trying to play this thing out of the box and you just want to play the games that come with it, you can totally do that, but don't get too excited if you are buying this thing for PSP. It can play PSP okay. Some games are okay, some games are not. But the game selection is mostly PSP minis. Do you guys remember PSP minis? They were basically like indie games before indie games. They were like these little short, almost mobile tier games you could get for like a couple bucks. And a lot of the selection here is minis. And you can forget finding these things alphabetically, by the way. As you can see, these are not in alphabetical order at all. They're basically just kind of thrown into this thing, and it's up to you to look through every game list to find the game that you want, assuming it doesn't come up in the search. Out of the box, the PSP controls were not correct. By default, this thing, along with most emulators, has a Nintendo layout where A is select, B is cancel. That's pretty common, but usually, at least outside of Japan, PlayStation uses the bottom button as select and the side button as cancel. So what they did with PlayStation is they remapped the controls, except they didn't do it correctly. Instead of switching it so that this was select and this was cancel, they made it so that Y over here was select and X on the top was cancel, and then square and triangle were over here. Completely incorrect, completely wrong. Fortunately, you can go into the menu by pressing the menu button here, and you go down to Handle Controls, and that will let you change it. And as you can see, it's incorrect. A is set to X, B is set to Y, and so on. However, where I ran into an issue personally for making this video was I went and I changed it, I corrected it and made it so that these buttons were what they're supposed to be. But that didn't work. It still acted as though this was X, this was Y, and so on. Then I realized I wasn't recording, and I went to go change that, so I changed it back to the default just for showing the camera, and then it worked. Like as you can see right here, it's set up incorrectly in the menu. But when I go into the game, it's fixed now. It doesn't say that it's correct. It still says that it's wrong, but it's fixed now. This is Japanese, so this is supposed to be select, this is supposed to be cancel, but still, it works the way it's supposed to. Like, what the heck? This thing is so inconsistent that even when you fix it, it doesn't fix, but then when you try to break it, it fixes. Make up your mind. E6, please.
And with PlayStation, it looks like you can't even play certain games that require a memory card because there's no digital memory card set up in the system, which is something that's pretty much standard with every other emulator. I can't play this because there's no memory card found. Sure, I could save state, but this should work. This is supposed to work.
And then you have N64. N64 actually kind of performs okay for a $50 device, except it's awful. At least in my experience. Something like Mario 64 works alright. The frame rate kind of drops at times. You kind of have to exit the game and reopen it for the frame rate to correct itself, and then it's pretty playable. But then you load up something else like WWF WrestleMania 2000, and the thumbstick functions like the D-pad, but the D-pad also functions like the D-pad. So you can't move. You can't do anything that the thumbstick would do, which is basically everything. Navigating the menus, moving your character, you can't do it at all. Now you probably think, well, just fix it in the settings. You can't. If you go into the menu to try to change the controls, there's no way to change the D-pad or the thumbsticks. You can only change the face buttons and shoulder buttons. Obviously, as we can see, there's a bunch of N64 games here that I'm not going to test each and every one to see which ones work correctly and which ones don't. But the fact that I was able to launch two of probably the more popular games on this thing for N64 and run into that problem, I mean, that's pretty concerning. Now, one major issue, I could get past the frustrations with this thing for the price, if not for one issue that I consider to be a fairly major issue, and that is the screen stretching. This is a 16:9 screen. This is going to be best for something like PSP. Most of the systems that will run well on this device are going to be your older systems like Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Super Nintendo, and so on. Most of these systems are not 16:9. They run 4:3, or in the case of Game Boy, 1:1, but you can't change them. They all run in this stretched out 16:9 aspect ratio, and it just doesn't look great. Maybe I'm just picky. Maybe you can get past it and you can do it just fine. Personally, I would love the option to change the screen so that you can play it in the correct aspect ratio. One thing you might also possibly notice, at least with Game Boy and Game Boy Color, is this weird filter where everything looks kind of chunky and weird. It doesn't look pixely. That's because there's this filter in, I believe, RetroArch. It puts this weird filter on some older systems. It's like an artificial sharpening, and to me personally, it looks awful. And that is also something that you cannot change. You can't turn that off. It is just how these games are going to look. So real quick, we're going to go into the in-game menu here to show you what you can do. You can continue playing, you can reboot, change your save state slot, save the state, loading status. They mean load state. It says loading status. It's a translation thing. It means load state. You can handle controls, which again just takes you to this screen where you can only change the face buttons and the shoulder buttons. Nothing here. And exit the game, and that's it. That is the only thing you can do for every system on this device. Now, sometimes minimalism for this kind of stuff can be a good thing. I personally find the amount of settings in RetroArch and whatnot to be daunting at times, and I only know what certain things do. But I know enough to know when I want to be able to change the aspect ratio, maybe turn integer scaling on or off. So when you can barely do anything, it is extremely limiting and extremely frustrating, especially when a lot of these games need the option to be able to do different things and change different things. If these systems were all set up correctly out of the box, all the buttons worked as they're supposed to, there was no ugly filters, all the aspect ratios were correct, this would be an easy recommendation for $50. With the form factor, the materials, how this thing feels, because it's actually pretty comfortable, it would be pretty easy to recommend it at that price if everything was just set up correctly, even with the janky software. I'll take the janky search function. I'll take the lack of customization. Just have everything set up to work correctly. And the weirdest thing about this whole thing is that this supposedly runs on Android. What? I tried to search for this thing online to get some more information, see if maybe there was something I'm missing, and I found that it runs on Android, and I was like, there's no way that's correct. There's no way a $50 device runs on Android. Android devices usually start at around $150, and with those you can usually play up to like GameCube and PS2. They also let you use the Android operating system to download stuff from the Google Play Store and so on, which this has, as far as I can find, zero access to. Yet when I adjusted the volume for the first time, look at that. That is what it looks like when you change the volume on an Android device, at least maybe a few generations back. And when you turn it off, it pops up this little screen. It even refers to the thing as a tablet. So now I'm wondering, does this thing really run Android in the background? I can't help but wonder if there's custom firmware out there, or maybe somebody someday will be willing to make custom firmware where you can customize this thing and actually get it to a point where it's usable. If that's the case, if you know if there's any custom firmware out there that makes this thing way more viable as a device at this price range, this thing could be killer. If you do know of any custom firmware for this thing, let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll do a follow-up video and check it out and show you that this thing can be redeemed. For now, personally, I cannot recommend it for $50. And yeah, that is the E6 handheld, possibly from GameMT. It's from a company, and I have it in my hands. Maybe you want to get it in your hands. Maybe for the price, you're like, hey, I'll check it out either way. So if you want to do that, again, I will have an affiliate link in the description for the 128 gigabyte model, and possibly a coupon code as well. So look for that. If you do decide to purchase it from there, it greatly helps the channel, and it would mean quite a bit. But if you want to help the channel for free, then yeah, feel free to subscribe if you're new. Leave a like, leave a comment, and let me know what you think of the E6. Is it something that maybe I totally misunderstand and there's something I need to find here that I've totally somehow missed? Then let me know. I'm very curious. Maybe you know, otherwise, maybe there's another device around this price range that you'd recommend. As for me, I'm out of here. It is very hot. I didn't even bother to change my shirt out of this thing, which I don't really wear on camera often, because it is warm, it is summer, it is 7 a.m. and I'm already sweating. And yeah, I'm out of here. If you want to watch another video, I've got them here on the screen. You can click on my face somewhere here to subscribe. Not this face, but like the little face picture. And I'm going to skedaddle now.